everyone. Now, I know that there are several shows on the internet that go over aspects of game theory, and we have great people out there covering it like Egoraptor, Extra Credits, and MovieBob, and if you don't watch them, then you should definitely check them out. And I don't mean to steal the spotlight away, I just wanted to take a moment to share my experiences and my views with a series I'm sure that you're all familiar with, Pokemon. I was originally going to make this review in the vein of most other internet reviews, but I figured that I'd be a bit more constructive with it. Pokemon has always been a series that I've played avidly and I've taken very seriously, especially as of late, but I feel it's a series that is both completely overrated and underrated at the same time. I feel like people love it, but they don't really understand it, and hardcore gamers tend to dismiss it as being a kid's game, aside from the monstrously popular online and tournament battling scenes. However, I think it's a series that deserves attention and study, and I figured what better place to start than with a game in the series that made the most impact to me, Diamond and Pearl. My relationship with Diamond and Pearl was never one that I would really call friendly. In fact, for the longest time, I said that I hated the games. However, I never gave much of a reason or thought as to why outside of the core feeling I got while playing them. However, I figured I should give them just attention and really try and explain and quantify why I felt that way. Through math. Looking back, the thought that enters my mind first is that moves in Diamond and Pearl really felt a lot less impactful. It seems that a lot more of the game was based around status buffs and not so much around the actual battling, and that the moves that did do damage really didn't do a lot of it. So I decided to look into the moves introduced in each generation and see how they compared to each other, and surprisingly, moves introduced in Generation 4 not only have the highest ratio of damaging moves to non-damaging, but by far have the highest average power of any of the other generations. In fact, the power level was so drastically higher that in Generation 3 and 4, the moves from 1 and 2 actually underwent revision, and the power levels were adjusted to make them more on par with the moves introduced in the later generations. Now, while this does show evidence of Pokemon suffering from a very slight case of power creep, which I will get to in a bit, and Extra Credits covers this subject a lot better than I do, so you should definitely go and check out the video if you want to learn more. But while this does show evidence of power creep, this evidence is in the complete opposite direction of my hypothesis, so my theory about the combat was completely out the window. My second common complaint that I had that I brought up to myself over time was that the starters were bad. Everyone that I talked to about this remembered the original 3 starters, and they remarked about how powerful they were, but they didn't really like the Generation 4 starters. I remember them being weak, I remember them learning bad moves, and I remember them not really being of any use except for Torterra. However, when I looked into this, I found out some more evidence that once again ruined my theory. The Generation 4 starter of each type not only tended to have more moves of their type, increasing stab damage, but also tended to have a high average power when it came to their moves. Empoleon proved to be an outlier to this scenario, but something still felt wrong. I remembered Infernape being especially useless to this, but his type advantage and average power was the highest of any of the fire starters. However, if you look at his moveset, one of his fire moves only does 15 damage on average, an amount that is meaningless by the time he learns it at the level he learns it at, and his most powerful one, Flare Blitz, hurts him when he uses it. Not only hurts him, but makes him receive 1/3 the damage that he deals. By the time that he learns it, at level 57, not only do most players fight using type advantage, meaning that he's going to be sent out mostly for one-hit kills, but this means that since he not only gets stabbed, but also a boost due to his high physical attack stat, he's going to end up taking an absurd amount of damage from that one move. His averages are good, but Infernape's moveset is absolutely broken from a strategy standpoint. I had my evidence against the starters. I also wanted to check out Landscape, because I remember the landscape in Sinnoh being really unimpressive and bland, and I wanted to take a look at it for myself. These are color bars that I made showcasing the average color of every area the players encountered in the game in the order that they encountered them. Sinnoh has the least amount of color variation aside from Johto, a region with the game made 2 generations of hardware prior with a severely smaller color range. I had a thought during my writing and planning though. Perhaps this was intentional. The aesthetic of Pokemon from a color perspective has always been changing, as shown here, so maybe instead of making a varied colorscape like the one shown in Hoenn, they tried for something a bit more centralized and stylized. Whether this was intentional or not is entirely up in the air, but I don't know if I can really say whether one or the other is better. Something like this is entirely subjective, so I can't really prove an objective reason as to why it's better or worse. I chalked it up as a draw. The next part I can say is objectively worse, and that's the variation in geography. Of all of the generations in Pokemon, Generation 4 had the fewest amount of new areas introduced from the previous generation, and it's tied with Kanto for the lowest amount of areas at all. This is completely inexcusable. The games were made on advanced handheld technology that surpassed the GBA by a far leap, and the worlds they provided felt dull and lifeless. I had always said this, but now I had proof. Most of where we'd been before, and even when it was showing us stuff we hadn't been before, it didn't really show us a lot of it. The last thing that I wanted to compare was speed, and this is the thing that felt very, very obvious to me even back in the day. Generation 4 felt very slow to me at the time of play, and when I tried playing it again recently, it felt like absolute grinding torture to play it. So, to test my hypothesis, I played each game in the series from Kanto to Sinnoh, timed them, and then did an average time of wild battles taking place in the first areas of the game. Sinnoh's intro time is unbelievably long. The only intro that comes close to it is Johto, which again was made on far simpler and slower machinery and involved you doing much more than you did in the Diamond and Pearl intro. Not only that, but Pearl's average battle time was almost twice what it was in any other game in the series. I wanted to see how this could be fixed though, so I fired up my white version and gave it the same exact test. Its intro was also lengthy, but it shaved a good 5 minutes off of Pearl's, with battle times taking almost exactly half the length. This speed of battle is a terrible design choice to attach to a game like Pokemon. As much as I love the games, I admit that by nature, they are very grind-oriented, and the main battle mechanic is based around slow, methodical turn-based combat. When you take something slow and make it run even slower, and focus the entire game around that slow combat, you are making a time bomb. Players are going to get bored very, very easily. Some may be wondering why I used Fire Red and Leaf Green in this comparison instead of the original Red and Blue. The answer is because those games came out before Diamond and Pearl did. It showed that they had experience bringing something slow into a faster, more accessible generation and making it adapt well to modern technology. This makes Pearl's design and speed decisions make even less sense, because they had this knowledge prior. Game Freak aren't stupid, and balancing the battle mechanics of hundreds of Pokemon is not an easy task, and when making this, they were well aware of things like how long an average battle would take. Now speaking of balance, I wanted to return to the idea of power creep that I mentioned earlier, why it's a concern for Pokemon, as well as some ideas I have on how Pokemon can be changed for the better. If the current trend keeps happening, the power level of moves in Pokemon will continue to rise up to the point of making old moves obsolete. Now, this is something far more drastic and more dangerous in a game such as World of Warcraft, but for a game that wishes to become as global as it is, Pokemon has to watch out for it. Before, the issue never came into their mind because Pokemon battles were limited to the generation they were on and very rarely the past generation. Now that consoles and handhelds have readily available internet access, Pokemon is trending further and further into being something that can't and should not be limited to just the generation they were made for, with some obvious exceptions like some generations not having the data for the Pokemon in the later ones. As for the core mechanics, I have a few things I would like to address, as well as some suggestions. A lot of people complain that the mechanics of Pokemon have never changed, but I would like to raise a point in the defense of the games about this. For a game series like Pokemon, which is primarily focused around trading and battling other people in a real-world environment, revamping battle mechanics every iteration would make this vision of a perpetual Pokemon experience virtually impossible. Final Fantasy is a game series known for reinventing its mechanics and balance every iteration, but that is not a path that a game like this can follow. The reason for this is not because Pokemon in one generation will have very different movesets or power levels, but because the way in which the Pokemon fight and behave will be fundamentally different. It would be like making a Final Fantasy battle game where one side used turn-based combat and the other side fought using the ATB system. It would make absolutely no sense, and it would make the series incongruous with itself in a way that a series like this cannot be. Even something as simple as adding a dodge feature or a fifth move to combat makes a huge change in the way that the game is played and the way that strategies are concocted. Instead, Pokemon needs something that is designed around the core of the battle. The Castlevania series is fantastic at this concept. Every game keeps the idea of running around, stabbing things, getting XP, leveling up, and navigating the non-linear environment. However, the way that this happens changes in every game. Soma Cruz used souls, Shinoa used glyphs, and Portrait let you control 2 characters to navigate this. These are design choices and changes built around the core mechanics of exploration. They do not completely rewrite them, which is a detail a lot of people tend to overlook and confuse. If Pokemon must change, I have some suggestions on how it may do that. Adding something like battles having terrain may do something other than just having a background to the battle. It would mean that battles itself work in the same way, but the way in which that mechanic is strategized is now different because you have hazards such as fallable rocks or maybe even trees that could catch fire. Another suggestion may be making it so that certain Pokemon take to certain environments better. I know that we have things like Sunny Day and Rain Dance giving type boosts, but I think that we could take this one step further. Maybe having a Pokemon be able to hide better in woods, or maybe they can break a footing another Pokemon is standing on with a move like Karate Chop. This way, not only can online introduce a map section and add more variation into online battles, but you can choose to use ordinary backgrounds when battling previous generations because your Pokemon will still have the same 4 moves and will still be able to battle in the same way without the other mechanics built around that core. Pokemon is a great series, and I truly hope to see it grow and change in wondrous ways. It's been a part of my childhood, it's been a part of your childhood, and I look forward to it being all a part of our adulthoods as well. And hopefully this video has helped you appreciate those little cartridges you own a little bit more. Thank you for watching.